Okay, so this is a thinky one, I'm afraid, not a drama one. But I think this is going to be one of the biggest questions to face mankind at some point in its future, which is what are we going to do when the robots come for our jobs? And I've maybe phrased that in a way that makes it sound like some kind of science fiction. And I suppose in the here and now, it is a science fiction. But what I mean is, with the advance of general artificial intelligence, a point will come whereby we can create robots that can do 99.9% of the jobs that we do presently and do them to a greater degree of fidelity than we can do them presently. And in those situations, you can absolutely see why a robot would be a better choice than a human, because it can do that job for 24 hours a day, potentially. It never gets tired. It doesn't need to be paid. It can perform the task if it has those mental abilities that are at least as great or greater than ours. It can perform those tasks to a higher degree of fidelity with data banks of information related to that job that can be assessed and verified in the way that our own cannot be. And of course, there are not the same safety concerns that there are with us. Now, of course, this kind of business of robots taking our jobs has carried on since the Industrial Revolution and takes place today, but we're talking about a very, very different thing there. You're talking about things that are just doing mechanized tasks, that are taking mechanized work away from people, often replacing the work of several people with the work of one piece of machinery, of one robot. Okay, but that in itself has opened up new avenues and opportunities for design and for creation and for invention and things like that, and also for servicing those pieces of machines and for designing and creating more pieces of machines. This revolution that I'm talking about will not look like that, because the creation and the design and the repair of robots will be performed by other robots, right? So we need to get it out of our minds of the fact that we can move on to other tasks. There will still be some tasks that remain. Oddly, from my own perspective as a firefighter and a YouTube vlogger, probably the one task out of those two that would remain is the task that I'm performing now, because I dare say that a lot of people would rather hear another human being spout incoherent shite than hear a robot do exactly the same. And so in terms of more artistic things, music, poetry, literature, in terms of that rug that you have on your living room floor, I think most people would rather have one that's been made by another person, even if that means ultimately that it's not manufactured to quite the same tolerances. We value the fact that some things are made by other people. But outside of that, the vast majority of the things that we need and we want, that really doesn't feature in as a concern. And so this seems to me to be a real problem, and this is a problem that I've dwelt on for some time, is what exactly is everybody going to do? It's been often spun as this kind of utopian scenario where we're all just sat on our asses eating strawberries and cream and just enjoying our leisure time while the robots do everything for us. But we need to factor this in to the kind of economic scenarios we have and see just how is this going to work. As many of you will be aware, we have this concept of the moment of the 1%, and on a global basis, I think the 1% actually own more than half of the world's wealth now. Now, obviously, that's a slightly misleading statistic because it doesn't take into account the fact that some things are more expensive in those countries that have the accumulation of the 1%ers. But even if you look on individual countries, wealth tends to be accumulated in the hands of very few. But nevertheless, the vast majority of people on working age are not on welfare, which means the vast majority of people of working age are going out there and not only earning enough to be able to support themselves and their family, but also earning enough to pay some into the system. So whatever problem people may have with that 1%, right, it's still not it's still not an absolute problem. It's not an unsurmountable problem, and it's maybe a problem that people see more as a moral problem than anything else. But what I predict is this situation in the future, if we adopt the kind of economic models that we have at the moment, which is that the 1% will not only be the most wealthy 1% that holds nearly all the wealth, but they will be the only people that are accumulating any wealth, because there will not be any work for the other 99%. Now, maybe that's a slight exaggeration. Maybe there'll be another 9% that are performing artistic roles, weaving little fucking baskets and making rugs and making poetry and singing songs and singing Kumbaya and all that kind of crap, right? But there's only so much of that we really want, that we only buy so many rugs for our front room, so many rattan baskets for our laundry. And the rest of the time, what we want is high-tech gadgets. We want things like this, we want things like that, we want things like this, don't we? These are the kind of things that we want, and they're not satisfied by having that human touch. I really don't want a human-made mobile phone that's going to go wrong after 10 minutes when I can have a machine-made one that has been designed and made by a robot that's going to be 20 times as good and 50 times as reliable. So the problem that I see it, and this is the problem, is that 1% is going to be the 1% of people that own the robots. They're not employing tens of thousands of people anymore. This 1% are employing tens of thousands of robots and making all these things, maybe in a competitive marketplace alongside other people that have fleets of tens of thousands of robots. And there are two problems with this. The first is, what is everybody else going to do? How are they going to be sustained, and how are they going to be nourished? We need to have some way of doing that. And the second thing, if there's only 1% of people that are producing anything and earning anything and paying any tax, then who is going to buy their product anyway? Even if I take the most benevolent view possible towards that 1% that are producing anything and say, well, crack on, you do as well as you like. The fact is, how is that going to work? Who is buying the things that they are making? It seems to me as if the whole economy just grinds to a dust, because most people don't produce anything. It's not economically viable for them to produce anything, but because they're not producing anything, they don't have money to spend on the people that are. It happens to some degree now, but only with a small percentage of people, and most of our welfare systems in the West are robust enough because enough people are paying in to be able to support those people. Okay, so I've long thought, how are we going to get a solution to this? Bill Gates came up with something that he regards as a solution. I'm going to play you a little bit of footage of this and then discuss it and say why I don't think it's going to work in actual fact. Now, I'm not sure that Bill Gates is looking quite as far forward as I'm looking to quite the same level of the robots, the artificial intelligence is taking over. But nevertheless, this is quite an interesting solution. So have a listen to what Bill has to say.
Right now, if a human worker does, $50,000 worth of work in a factory, that income is taxed. If a robot comes in to do the same thing, you'd think that we'd tax the robot at a similar level.
So I listened to this a few days ago. It's not been online many days. And initially I was kind of drawn in listening to what he had to say. And I thought, yeah, maybe this is some kind of workable solution. But it quickly became apparent to me. And as I say, maybe Bill Gates isn't looking quite so far forward where robots are doing everything. But it quickly became apparent to me that I really cannot foresee how this could work. It's a kind of nice try, close but no cigar scenario here. So let me give you the three problems that I have with regard to what Bill Gates is suggesting here for this kind of workaround with regard to robots. The first is that it's one of these kinds of taxes that's very easy to talk about, but when you actually come to nailing down what it is exactly you're taxing and how that is going to be applied, I don't know how that is going to work. Are you doing it on a per robot basis, or are you going to have a kind of basic unit of robotics or something like that? Or are you going to have this business? He talks about if you employed a person and that person was earning $50,000, then that $50,000 would have been taxed. But that in itself is a very, very strange game to go down, because if you consider the levels of mechanization around the globe, effectively you freeze in those levels of mechanization. After all, there are parts around the world where the textile revolution hasn't even happened yet. And that happened hundreds of years ago in Manchester, in England, and in the surrounding towns. Right? And that was the start of the Industrial Revolution, where the work of 10 people would be taken over by a machine. that just needed one person to operate. So that's 9 people's work, that's 9 people's tax. So in those countries where the textile revolution hasn't taken place, will you start taxing those machines for the work of those 9 people? But in that instance, then how does that compare to a country where the textile revolution has occurred and now occurred many times over, and perhaps the work of 1,000 people are done by the work of one person, and so they won't be paying that tax. So effectively you're kind of freezing all things in some kind of moment in time, but who selects what the moment in time? Who selects what the difference is between a machine that just does the work of several people and what constitutes a robot? And if we go down the line of just taxing each robot, then you get into this artificial scenario where maybe I'm running a really big factory that would maybe benefit from having 1,000 individual robots scuttling around doing different tasks. But if you're going to tax me on the basis of each robot, then it's much better for me to have 10 Swiss Army knife style robots that do everything, rather than having 1,000 robots, because then I'm only paying 1/100th of the tax. So it's all a rather different, vague scenario. What constitutes the work of one person, and how do we allow for other kinds of mechanical advances that maybe wouldn't constitute the intelligent side of a robot, which is the thing that he's really trying to tax? It all sounds very, very complicated. It's also a very, very contrived scenario in this kind of ultimate doomsday scenario, economic doomsday scenario that I'm giving you. Remember, the scenario that I'm giving you is that only 1% of the population is generating any real wealth. Yeah, I might be still creating YouTube videos, but not enough to actually pay any tax, and I'm still going to be dependent on welfare effectively. So what you would have under Gates's solution is the 1% of people here employing these fleets of robots, paying tax on all of them. The state is collecting those tax and then giving it to the likes of you and I as welfare payments. And then we use those welfare payments to then spend on the goods that this 1% is producing via their fleets of robots. It all seems rather contrived, doesn't it? And there's also a kind of, this is the third problem that I have, which is a kind of ethical thing, which is that it all seems a very, very depressing way of organising things, that 99% of people are effectively on welfare, that they are just relying on the state to dole out money, and then the state is having to go to these 1% of people and take huge amounts of money from them and then dish it out to everybody else who's bumming around on welfare. Effectively, that is the scenario. So I'm not really sold on that. So I'm still going to go back to something that really came to me. I think this is a solution that I'm going to give you now that has took a long time for me to arrive at, right? Because this is a problem. This whole problem is one that I've considered just a little bit all the time, and running in the background, but for years now. And the solution has took a long time for me to arrive at, I think, because a position that's very popular now on the internet is to be very vehemently anti-capitalist, to blame capitalism for all the problems of society. But I'm not really one of those people, right? I am an advocate of capitalism, and I'll stand by capitalism as part of a mixed economy, yes, with a robust welfare system for those that fall on their ass, yes, but nevertheless a free market capitalist system where competition drives things on and drives progress on and gives us the things that we have, because I believe that it has given us all the things that we have, not just the trimmings that are surrounding me now, but even things like we enjoy in the United Kingdom with the National Health Service that is driven in terms of the drugs, in terms of many of the treatments that are possible today, in terms of the revenue that funds the National Health Service. It all sits on the back of a capitalist system, and actually systems, economic systems, countries, governments that have eschewed capitalism don't have such good welfare systems because they don't have the economic means to support those systems, and they don't have the advancement that the competitiveness of capitalism can give. That's not to say that capitalism is perfect and it doesn't tend to tread on some people. Of course it does, which is why you need a mix there. And you need some regulation, I believe. But I'm still a wedded capitalist. But I think that has held me back. And it's taken a leap on my part, really, and a big leap, because and this is really why I wanted to make this video. It's not for the people that are wedded hard socialists and communists and all this kind of thing, who are quite happy with state ownership of nigh on everything. But for those people that really rail against this like I do, because now I'm looking at a future, might be centuries away still, but I'm looking at a future where maybe that will be the model, where maybe that has to be the model, where that is the best model. And I'll tell you why. The problems that I have with those kind of systems at the moment is that they disincentivize people and they limit progress. They disincentive. What is the point me striving to achieve if I'm not going to be reimbursed in line with the responsibilities, reimbursed in line with the amount of studying and work that it takes? Why not just do the simplest job if the state is going to pay me the same for every single task? If there's only one company doing every single thing and that company is the corporation of the state, then how are you going to deal with inefficiencies? How are you going to progress when there isn't the competitive marketplace to do so? And these are the problems that we have seen, of course, across the communist states that have existed. But none of those are really issues with this future thing, because it isn't employing us to do jobs in this future state. It's not that the state is employing us as the one employer for all these individual roles, but rather what it is that, look, if what you're going to have is robots producing everything, robots designing everything, robots creating almost everything, right, then isn't it better for the state to own those robots than for private enterprise to own those robots? Why? Because if the state own those robots, then we own those robots. And whereas in Bill Gates' scenario, private people own the robots, the state is then forced to tax them with swinging levels of taxation and pay us welfare. If we own the robots because the state owns the robots and the state is us, effectively, then what we are getting on the back of that is a dividend of the profits that that corporation is making. That is what we're getting. It's not a welfare payment, it's a dividend payment, because there are robots there. And all the inefficiencies that you would normally have with a state system will not be present, because it's not lazy tykes like you and I that'll sooner sit on our arse in an uncompetitive environment. It's robots that will work 24 hours a day, whether they're owned by the state or whether they're owned by a private corporation. So I don't see the problems that would exist, but I see the benefits now. And so now the money goes round in a much less contrived way. The government pays us a dividend payment, and then we use that dividend payment that gets reinvested back into the system. And not everybody will have the same, of course, still, because you could still be a top musician, you could still be a top sports star, you can still weave your rattan baskets or make your handmade rugs or make your crapola YouTube videos and earn a little bit extra. Of course you can, but everybody will get that basic dividend. And it seems to me it's a difficult pill for me to swallow to go down that model, but it's such a different economic scenario that I think that you have to forget everything that you know about the present world and the way that things have worked when we've tried them and the ethics of the things that exist in our present world, and look at it from this totally unique perspective, this unprecedented perspective of robots doing everything. Okay, I think I've talked long enough on this subject. I'm interested in two things. One, is there an alternative to the things that I've discussed in this video? If you think there is, or if you think that this scenario will never take place and you've got a reason why that is, then let me know. The second is, if like me, you are actually pro-capitalism, perhaps like me in a mixed economy with a welfare state, etc., but you're still generally pro-capitalism, is this a bitter pill that you're prepared to swallow? Or somehow do you feel that it's good for your sense of economic tastes? Does a solution have to fit in to a capitalist model somehow? Interested to know what your thoughts are on this, either in comments or in a response video. Thanks for watching as much as you've watched. If you've got this far, look after yourselves. Bye for now.